Chapter 61, Silent Prisoner. On the fifth floor of St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, Janice Thickey's ward had become an opulent cage. Cedric Diggory leaned against a stack of pillows, the gray London sky outside the window reflected in his once sunlit, now darker hazel eyes. He had survived and awakened, but found himself imprisoned in another way. Ministry healers and psychological experts took turns visiting, their tones gentle but unmistakably directive as they tried to recast the bloody memory of the graveyard into a post-traumatic construct. The pressure was too great, Mr. Diggory. The Triwizard Cup was imminent, and then an accident occurred. Mr. Potter has consistently stated, your mind, to protect you, constructed a plausible explanation. Cedric listened in silence, his nails digging into his palms. He did not argue. Jiangwu's warning, the Ministry of Magic is lying. Beware of disguises, had been branded into him like a cold, immovable stone and kept him from erupting. He understood that insisting on the truth of Lord Voldemort's return in front of those white-robed caretakers would only make them declare him mentally unstable and escalate their treatments. They even suggested a powerful calming draught to help him manage his emotions and sleep better. Cedric sensed a subtle magical weave in the potion meant to blur the edges of his memories. He pretended to drink it, but quietly poured most of the draught into the potted plant by his bed. A few days later, the once vibrant plant visibly withered. Gray spots spread across its leaves. The silent proof chilled him. There was nothing he could do but, when alone, whisper the true memory in a hoarse voice over and over, keeping it alive like a life-saving charm against drugs and suggestion. More than anything, he longed for news from the outside, about Harry, and about Jiangwu. He had a hazy awareness of the warm, persistent force that had pulled him back from darkness during his coma, and wanted to know its source. At Hogwarts, the last days of term passed in an uneasy calm. The pink scar Umbridge had left had not entirely faded, but freedom was beginning to return. Jiangwu spent most of her time in the Room of Requirement's makeshift spirit plant laboratory. The ghost vine, taken from beside the archway in the Department of Mysteries, sat in a specially made glazed pot, set atop black, yin-rich humus. The vine looked semi-transparent, gray-white and drained of ordinary vitality, neither living nor dead, suspended between states. It gave off a faint, cold soul presence, and would occasionally twist of its own accord, as if silently screaming. Jiangwu tried every means of communication she could think of, infusing gentle spiritual energy, humming quiet Eastern melodies, and even bringing a small sample of the residual archway energy, sealed by Professor Dumbledore, closer to the vine. The results were slight, but the vine's cold soul stirrings seemed to respond faintly to her spiritual currents, growing a touch more active, like ice meeting a warm current. The most peculiar reactions came from the moonstone brooch at her throat and the breathing earth seed tucked in her sleeve. When she neared the ghost vine, the breathing earth seed sent back an almost imperceptible pulse, a mixture of repulsion and curiosity, as though it had encountered something both familiar and strange. The moonstone glowed softly, a clear, soothing light that seemed to calm the vine's chaotic soul fluctuations. A creation between life and death, a blend of soul fragments and plant matter, she wrote in her notebook. Perhaps it can perceive beings who are also between life and death. The thought of Sirius, who had fallen into the archway, stirred her. A bold, distant plan began to take root. Could this mutated ghost vine offer even the tiniest glimpse into what lay beyond the archway? Could it give her a clue at all? The Hogwarts Express steamed west toward London, carrying students who had weathered a turbulent school year. This farewell lacked the usual clamor and uninhibited laughter. The carriages were thick with an odd mixture of exhaustion, grief, confusion, and a fragile flicker of exhilaration that kept getting shoved down. Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley flanked Harry Potter, their silence louder than any words. Looks passed between them like promises. This summer they would not sit idly by. Dumbledore's army would not stop because school had ended. Jiangwu sat alone in a compartment, the rushing landscape outside failing to catch her eye. Her fingertips kept finding the ghost vine sample sealed in a special container beneath her sleeve as her mind ran through experimental designs and the dangerous archaic magic arrays that might be needed. Each blast of the train's whistle seemed to urge her onward. At the mist-swathed Chixia stream, her father, Jiang Heng, waited by the bluestone path. He still wore his cyan Taoist robe. His bearing was gentle as jade. But when his gaze settled on his daughter, he immediately noted the change in her aura. Beneath her usual cool composure, there was a new temperament, tempered and sharpened, like jade refined by fire and plunged in cold water, heavier, harder, more precise. She did not greet him with small talk. "Father," she said, voice urgent, "I need to consult the ghost chapter, notes from the other shore, and every rare book on stabilizing spatial rifts and diverting magical energies." He asked nothing further, merely inclined his head. "The innermost layer of the library, the third bookshelf. You know the rune key. Be careful, and don't overstrain yourself." He understood that his daughter had already walked into dangerous, unfamiliar territory. All summer, Zhang Wu had rarely left home, burying herself in recondite ancient texts. Chixia Stream's library was older and more secretive than Hogwarts' restricted section. Many of its bamboo slips and jade scrolls required spiritual activation to read. She hunted for records of the Netherworld, the Soul Bridge, Karma Fire, and Rebirth. Behind the half-legendary warnings and veiled prescriptions, she hoped to find clues that would explain the ghost vine and the archway she had encountered. She kept in touch with the wider world through the Order of the Phoenix's most discreet channels, improved communication dandelion seeds that could slip across weak, magical barriers for very short distances. From Tonks's intermittent, brave reports, Tonks had several times used her metamorph magus talents to infiltrate the tightly guarded fifth floor of St. Mungo's. Jiang Wu learned that Cedric Diggory's bodily functions were slowly stabilizing under constant spells and healing, but he was being watched more tightly than ever and nearly cut off from visitors. He had become unusually quiet and compliant, which eased some of the ministry's suspicions, but Tonks had noticed a cold clarity in his eyes whenever he glanced at a window or watched his healers. It was not numbness or despair, it was calculation and scrutiny. The Diggorys themselves were under unbearable pressure. Ministry officials circulated to pay superficial visits and to suggest that they should persuade their son to accept reality. Mr. Diggory's face had deepened with worry. He began secretly consulting authoritative volumes on memory charms and trauma, his mistrust growing by the day. Cracks were widening within the ministry. Fudge still rambled and denied, but Cedric's return had become a poisoned thorn, pricking the consciences of many who had tried to stay neutral. Behind closed doors, panic and heated argument were breaking out. The Daily Prophet continued to parrot the official line, but even Rita Skeeter's pen had started to veer. Several columns, framed as discussions of the reliability of post-traumatic memory, cited obscure cases in magical psychology and planted tiny seeds of doubt. Rufus Scrimgeour was mentioned more often. His hard, pragmatic style appealed to those who longed for order and decisive protection in an increasingly anxious nation. Harry endured this summer like he had once endured the cupboard under the stairs. Each day a small, private torture, though he no longer lived at Privet Drive. The scars' warm flashes, the raw grief over losing his godfather, worry for his friends, and fear of what the future might bring felt like a dozen restraints. He practiced occlumency frantically, guided by Hermione's insights and encrypted letters. She used Muggle cryptographic tricks alongside magical measures, and by an isolated, driving anger. Progress was slow and erratic. He woke more nights in a cold sweat, shaken by Voldemort's rage or by fragments of dreams. His letters to Cedric sank like stones into the sea. They gave him no reply and multiplied his loneliness. At St. Mungo's, Cedric's resistance was quiet but concrete. He had secretly dismantled an old dim ward lamp in his room, salvaging a misplaced basic rune patch left by an inattentive healer. With a practical Hufflepuff knack and a working understanding of magical mechanics, he had, after all, improved certain applications of dragon dung fertilizer. He cobbled together a crude device from the simplest components to generate a faint interfering field. It blurred low-level surveillance magic for short periods. Mostly, he replayed the graveyard over and over in his mind with the obsessive care of a craftsman polishing an instrument. The shapes of the eyes beneath the Death Eater's masks, the accents and phrases that might reveal identities, each odd step an ingredient in Voldemort's resurrection ritual. He stored those details like knives, knowing they could one day cut through the web of lies spun around that night. He waited, patient and watchful, like a badger in winter, holding back in its burrow until the right moment to come out. The summer holiday drifted by under a suffocating sky, every day heavy with the promise of a storm. Halfway through the break, on a gray afternoon, an unremarkable black car with the Ministry of Magic license plate drew up outside the Diggory's neatly trimmed hedge in Ottery St. Catchpole. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out, lion-maned hair, a rugged beard, eagle-sharp eyes, and confident, purposeful strides. Rufus Scrimger. He arrived unannounced, blunt and efficient. In the Diggory's neat, somber sitting room, he wasted no time on the soft-pedaled politicking of a fudge. He got straight to the point, his stare fixed on Cedric, who sat pale but upright on the sofa. "Mr. Diggory," Scrimger said in a low, hoarse voice that carried the weary authority of someone used to command, "I know what you've been through, and I know most of what's being spread out there is rot." Mrs. Diggory made a small, shocked sound. "A lot of people choose to bury their heads in the sand because they're scared," Scrimger went on, blunt as ever. "They'd rather swallow a neat lie than face a hard truth. I'm not like that. I run the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. I deal in facts and threats, not ostrich policies." Cedric met his gaze steadily. He didn't answer at once, only his fingers curled tighter on his knees. Scrimger produced a slender, faintly shimmering silver vial from an inner pocket and set it on the coffee table. "This is a memory fragment taken from the Department of Mysteries after the battle," he said, tapping the glass with his wand. The mist inside glowed, and then a chilling sound filled the room. Bellatrix Lestrange's wild, triumphant cackle. "Caw! Feel it! For the return of the Dark Lord. Clear away this troublesome trash." The lunatic devotion to the title Dark Lord in that voice made the hairs on the back of every neck rise. "Fudge and his spineless lot don't want to look at this," Scrimger said as he returned the vial to his pocket, his voice hardening. "They want to smother it, but I want the truth, the whole, unvarnished truth. This isn't just accounting for what happened, Mr. Diggory. It's about how we prepare and respond to the storm coming for us. Your testimony could be one of the most powerful weapons to cut through their deceit." Cedric's heart churned. He wanted to clear Harry's name, to expose Voldemort's designs, but he also understood the cost implicit in Scrimger's words. "Mr. Scrimger," he said at last, voice a little raw from disuse but unnervingly clear, "I want to tell the truth. But if I stand up and say all this, my family and I will immediately become prime targets for every Death Eater hiding in the shadows. Mr. Fudge's protection," he let a bitter smile twist his mouth, "isn't what will stop a true killing curse." He paused to let that land, then steadied his voice. "Before I decide whether and how to testify, I need ironclad guarantees. My parents must be moved to a place that is absolutely safe, under protection that is genuinely reliable and impenetrable. And I need to see two people first, Harry Potter and Jiang Wu. There are details about that night, about the maze and certain things I felt afterwards that I must confirm with them." He was asking for more than bodyguards. He wanted a circle of allies who were both powerful and trustworthy, not a one-sided bargain with a ministry that might crumble. Scrimger's eyes sharpened, as if weighing a valuable but dangerous instrument, assessing Cedric's courage, judgment, and the risks his demand carried. A long silence settled, broken only by the mantel clock's ticking. The Diggorys watched both men, barely breathing. Finally, Scrimger inclined his head, the motion almost imperceptible but decisive. "It can be arranged," he said. His voice was still rough, but it held a promise of action. "Everything will be kept absolutely secret. The effort will require the strictest planning and protection. As for the guarantees you ask for, I will prioritize them. What you can provide is worth the investment." It wasn't an absolute promise, but it was a major concession. The short, efficient meeting was a flash of lightning across Cedric's trapped world, illuminating his predicament and transforming him from a passive, protected boy into someone who could bargain, resist, and fight for his family's survival and for justice. His insistence on meeting Harry and Jiang Wu drew those two young people, already at the storm's eye, deeper into the struggle against Voldemort and a compromised ministry, pulling them into an even more dangerous, complicated power play. Beneath the last days of holiday calm, every faction was quietly taking its places. The storm that threatened the entire wizarding world was gathering fast, and the moment of breaking was approaching. The start of the 6th year at Hogwarts was cast in the long shadow of war. Dementors had been driven from the grounds, but the air was taut with tension. Dumbledore's private escort for Harry, the headmaster's more frequent absences, whispers in the corridors. Severus Snape had finally landed the Defense Against the Dark Arts post, a fact that made many quietly uneasy, while potions had been taken over by Horace Slughorn, suave, celebrity-loving nine, and devoted to good wine and food. Slughorn had wasted no time reforming his slug club, hunting for students with famous names, exceptional talents, or unusual backgrounds. Harry Potter, of course, topped the list. Ginny Weasley was invited for her fiercely effective Bat Bogey Hex, and Hermione Granger for being the cleverest witch in their year. To everyone's surprise, Zhang Wu received an invitation too, a heavy, gilt-edged letter threaded with silver and faintly scented with peach. The reason was perfectly Slughornian. I have long heard of your remarkable and singular herbalism. You must honor us with your presence and share your Eastern insights. Zhang Wu was about to use the letter as compost when another owl arrived. Its note was terse and secretive, a single line from Nymphadora Tonks. Patient needs a checkup. A party might be a good opportunity. T. Instantly, she understood. Slughorn's first party would be the ideal, unobtrusive chance. If Dumbledore had arranged the meeting, it would have to be handled quietly. She accepted. Slughorn's office was cramped and cloying, stacked with confectionery boxes and filled with the scent of perfume and icing. The walls were plastered with photographs of the professor, alongside famous faces. Harry, Ginny, and Hermione were already there, obliged to listen as Slughorn reminisced loudly about his illustrious former pupils. The door opened again with fanfare. "Ah, our other distinguished guest has arrived," Slughorn cried, beaming. "Welcome, welcome. Mr. Diggory, how splendid to see you. Merlin, preserve us. A miracle." All heads turned. Cedric Diggory stood in the doorway in a well-cut dark green robe. He still looked a little pale, less ashen than before, but thinner, the planes of his face sharper, his boyishness tempered by something quieter and more serious. His hazel eyes, once bright as summer, were deeper now, as though they had been stirred by storms and had settled differently. His return was clearly a Dumbledore-planned morale boost, but it would invite 1,000 questions. Slughorn, oblivious, continued to fuss. "A terrible accident, but look at him, so robustly recovered, truly exemplary of Hogwarts. Try my mead, restorative it is." Cedric managed a polite smile and moved through the room, his gaze skimming the faces as if searching for someone. He found her. Zhang Wu stood by the long table of refreshments, picking at a modest slice of pumpkin pie. Today she wore a dark robe embroidered with silver threads, understated, not showy, and somehow cooler than the sugary, perfumed room around her. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, everything went still. Surprise, relief, and something like joy flashed across Cedric's face. Zhang Wu's expression stayed composed, her fingers tightening slightly on the fork. Then, as if fate were feeling theatrical, an awkward misstep happened. Perhaps he was still unsteady, or perhaps nerves made him clumsy. As Cedric passed a carved armchair, the hem of his robe snagged on a projection of the wood. He stumbled. To steady himself, he reached out, and his hand plunged into a platter of jelly, thick and bouncy, smothered in pink syrup. "Merlin," Slughorn cried. Ginny choked on a laugh. Harry and Hermione glanced at each other, lips twitching with indecision between amusement and sympathy. Colored jelly cubes clung to Cedric's palm and splattered across his nose. He flushed from ear to neck, frozen, ridiculous, and exposed, the champion undone by dessert. Quietly, without fanfare, Zhang Wu extended a plain handkerchief toward him. It smelled faintly of Ninglu grass. Cedric looked up and met her cool, clear gaze. For a moment, there was the ghost of a smile at its edges. "Scourgify would be faster," she said evenly, as if discussing weather. "But a handkerchief seems more appropriate for a party." She inclined her head toward where Slughorn was frantically bellowing for towels. Taking the offered cloth, Cedric mopped at his hand and temple with clumsy dignity. The redness eased into a rueful, self-deprecating smile. Thank you, he said. I suppose my balance needs a bit more practice. The small, ridiculous disaster dissolved into something more human and immediate, awkward but real, and it closed the space between them more thoroughly than the most eloquent conversation could. Chapter 65, Greenhouse Night Talk and Information Sharing. Cedric rubbed the warm teacup unconsciously. The herbal tea Jiangwu had brewed carried a calming quality, easing some of the nervousness that still clung to him. The greenhouse smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves, mingled with the fresh, faintly medicinal aroma of the tea. The soft glow from a wand-lighting charm made their faces flicker with shadows. Not just St. Mungo's, Cedric repeated quietly. Sincere. When I was unconscious, it felt like I fell into a very deep, cold place. No feeling, just endless darkness and nothingness. Then it was as if a very warm, strong rope was thrown down. I couldn't grasp it, but it was there, showing me the way, pulling me up. He looked up. His hazel eyes were unusually bright in the dim light as he fixed them on Jiangwu. That was you, wasn't it? Jiangwu neither confirmed nor denied, only met his gaze calmly. Her silence answered him well enough. She shifted the conversation with her usual light voice. You woke up because your will was strong enough. What did Professor Dumbledore do? He visited me a few times, Cedric said, setting his cup down and leaning forward, lowering his voice. When I had just woken and was disoriented, he used a very complex spell to examine me and seemed to clear away some lingering dark influences. He said my awakening was a crucial sign, hope for a lot of people. He arranged for me to return, partly to monitor my recovery because Hogwarts is safer, and partly because he thought I could steady everyone, especially Harry. He hesitated, a shadow passing over his face. How is Harry? I know this has been hard for him. The Ministry is still denying it, aren't they? From what he'd heard from his parents and visitors, he already knew the ridiculous official line. Jiangwu nodded. The Daily Prophet called him attention-seeking. Many people don't believe him, including some students. He's very lonely, but he's strong. DA is still operating clandestinely, and Cho Chang has helped a lot. She mentioned Cho Chang without changing tone, but Cedric's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly. DA, that's good. He exhaled, relieved, then pushed on. What else? Out there? Are the Death Eaters becoming bold? Jiangwu's expression cooled. Professor Charity Burbage retired early. Her euphemism needed no gloss. Nocturne Alley has seen a lot more abnormal activity. Diagon Alley isn't as safe as it used to be either. And Snape, she said the name with a faint, dry edge, finally got his wish. Defense against the dark arts. Cedric made a small, involuntary sound. The fate of Professor Burbage sent a chill down his spine. Snape's promotion set off alarm bells. How is he teaching? Very Snape. Jiangwu said simply, dark, dangerous topics, framed as necessary to understand the enemy. Neville needs a large piece of chocolate after every class. Cedric fell quiet, letting the weight of the news settle. Outside the castle, the world was sliding faster into darkness, and within Hogwarts currents were just as troubling. He lifted his head, tone turning grave. We need to cross-reference everything, about that night, every turn in the maze, every spell, and the graveyard. The last two words made his voice tighten. He forced himself to steady his breath and began to recount in detail. The Triwizard Cup as a portkey, the churchyard at Little Hangleton, Wormtail's appearance, the boiling cauldron, the long rite, the cost in bone and flesh. He described the way Lord Voldemort had risen, a twisted, infantile form, creeping out of the cauldron, those first reptilian scarlet-slit eyes opening. After he came back, his power was immense, oppressively strong, Cedric said, his voice trembling faintly but controlled. But it felt wrong, like countless pieces forced together by the darkest magic, full of cracks, unstable. The magical fluxions he gave off were chaotic and violent, with a sort of decaying aura. He said Harry's blood gave him some sort of protection stronger than death, but I don't understand what exactly that meant. Jiangwu listened, interjecting only with a few key questions that drew out more details. She added what she knew, how Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Moody, had guided Harry toward the cup in the maze, and how Harry came back, scar-throbbing, clutching Cedric's body, repeating, "He's back." Professor Dumbledore knew immediately when he heard that. She said he was solemn but resolute. Cedric tried to dispel the terrifying images with a long breath. "He's different," he said finally, frowning. stronger, but more unhinged and unpredictable. As I said, his power is warped, fragmented. It feels like his soul is missing pieces, or so corrupted it's unrecognizable. He groped for words to convey the strangeness he sensed at the soul's level. Zhang gave him one: splitting. The single word confirmed his intuition. A mask of power with a rotten foundation. Tearing one's soul apart to try to buy immortality only leads to distortion and fragility. She didn't dwell on the darker technicalities. She didn't have to. The direction she pointed in was enough to shock and enlighten Cedric. Splitting a soul, terrifyingly insane. A faint snap from outside the greenhouse, like a dry twig breaking, made them both fall silent. Their wands were already in their hands, pointed toward the sound. Jiangwu closed her eyes and sent out a ripple of perception. 1 second, 2. Filch's cat, Madame Norris, she said, opening her eyes and relaxing. Probably chasing a gnome. The tension eased. Cedric realized his palms were damp with sweat and gave a wry, nervous smile. We'll have to be more careful. Even without the ministry watching them directly, Hogwarts was far from invulnerable. Tonight's late meeting in the greenhouse had let them share vital intelligence, deepen their understanding of the enemy, and clarify the brutal shape of the struggle ahead. Cedric's return was more than the recovery of a friend. It was the return of an important fighter to the resistance, one who had faced the darkest hour and brought back invaluable knowledge. In the shadowed glow of the greenhouse, their trust and resolve, forged in peril, felt even more unbreakable. Chapter 66, Potions Genius and Spiritual Plant Assistance. Sixth-year potions split into two extremes, perfectly reflecting the wildly different styles of the two professors. In Slughorn's classroom, warm, crowded, and redolent with odd, sweet scents, the mood was exuberant, almost theatrical. Slughorn lavished praise on his star pupils, especially Harry. Thanks to the old textbook and marginalia of the Half-Blood Prince, Harry's potion-making had leapt forward. He often outperformed even Hermione. "Excellent! Simply excellent, my boy!" Slughorn would exclaim, holding up Harry's flawless draught of living death, praising him to the whole class, his round belly trembling with delight. "Look at the color, the clarity. Perfect! Mr. Potter, you've inherited your mother's talent, no doubt." He never missed an opportunity to link Harry's success to Lily, and he occasionally prodded for gossip about prophecies or destiny, which made Harry both embarrassed and wary. Whenever Slughorn heaped this kind of praise on Harry, Hermione's lips tightened into a thin line, and her sharp eyes flicked toward Harry's battered textbook, as if she wanted to burn it. She followed the conventional instructions to the letter. Her results were excellent, but she was always a step slower than Harry, and that frustrated her deeply. Zhang, however, chose a different, unconventional middle path. She was skeptical of the Half-Blood Prince's unorthodox, even opportunistic, marginal notes. They were efficient, yes, but they carried a cold, ruthless streak, and anything for the end justification that clashed with the Eastern alchemical philosophy she had been taught: balance, harmony, and adapting to the character of one's ingredients. She relied on solid fundamentals and quietly on a little Eastern assistance. On the corner of her workbench sat a few inconspicuous aids, a small, palm-sized incense burner in which she burned her homemade calming incense, mainly concentration flower with a hint of camphor powder. The faint, fresh scent steadied the air around her and helped her concentrate, especially useful when Slughorn chattered or Snape's presence chilled the room. A jade porcelain vial held a handful of tiny pills she called precision beans. Taken, they sharpened her perception and fine motor control for short bursts, letting her feel minute changes in heat and stirring. A small box contained a special protective hand cream made from Texian vine sap blended with moonflower dew. A thin smear on her fingers offered some protection against corrosive or mentally corrosive properties of toxic magical materials. One potions class Slughorn assigned the notoriously complex and failure-prone draught of living death. Tension thrummed through the room as cauldrons hissed and emitted the occasional acrid cloud of failure. Harry followed the prince's notes with fluid confidence. Hermione worked meticulously, brow furrowed. Zhang moved more deliberately. She lit her incense first, letting the calming scent settle over her workspace. When it came to processing the sleeping pods, she refused the violent crushing method recommended in the prince's annotations, which might quicken extraction, but at the cost of potency and purity. Instead, she dabbed a bit of protective hand cream on her finger and gently coaxed the pulp out. The moonflower dew in the cream helped soothe the pod, while the Texian vine's sap lent a kind of resilience. The juice came out clean and complete, the pods shriveling translucent with no waste. At the point where she needed to stir counterclockwise 7.5 times with precisely controlled force, she popped a precision bean. Her arm became a finely tuned instrument. Speed, pressure, and angle of each stir were exact, producing a calm, harmonious flow of magic in the cauldron. When she finally decanted an impossibly clear moonlit draught into a crystal vial, Slughorn hurried over, eyes wide. "Merlin! Perfect! Simply perfect!" He held the vial up to the light, peering at it closely. "Miss Jiang, your technique, so steady, so fluid, with an almost Eastern rhythm. Brilliant. Not a hint of impatience, everything under control. Professor Snape will be kicking himself for letting a potion's genius go unrecognized." He did not notice the small aids on her bench that had guided her. All the credit went to her unique style. Hermione stared at Jiang Wu's impeccable potion, then at her own successful but slightly clouded result, her expression a tangle of admiration and resentment. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then only sighed and scrubbed her cauldron harder. Harry, meanwhile, gave Jiang Wu a genuine impressed smile and slipped her a secret thumbs up. Cedric, sitting with the 7th years because he needed to make up practical classes, watched the scene and couldn't help smiling too, happier at her success than if he'd brewed a perfect potion himself. Snape's defense against the dark arts lessons were the other extreme. The classroom felt like a cold cellar, dread hung in the air. Snape, all black robes and saturnine glides, moved among the desks like a massive bat, his voice silk-coated venom. He taught dangerous, dark spells under the pretense that only by understanding darkness could one resist it. He delighted in making students practice agonizingly painful but non-fatal curses on each other, sneering at every failure. Neville Longbottom became a favorite target. Longbottom, if your brain were wired even slightly closer to a troll's than a mandrake's, you would grasp that the movement depends on the wrist, not flailing your entire arm like a wandless batter. 5 points from Gryffindor for your abysmal performance. Neville emerged from class pale and shaking, taking a long time to recover after each session. Harry kept every nerve taut. He wanted to master these dangerous spells. He knew they might save his life, and he was always on guard against Snape probing his mind. In this oppressive setting, Jiang Wu's small aids played a different but vital role. The calming sachet kept her mind clear under Snape's pervasive mental pressure. The precision beans helped her quickly pinpoint the subtle control needed for defensive charms that demanded extreme calm and steadiness, such as nuanced variations of the shield charm. The protective hand cream even blunted the worst of the panic radiating from Neville during one practice of a mental shielding spell that reflected faint ill will. With it on her fingers, she resisted the panic's pull and stabilized her spell far quicker than expected. Snape's assessment was characteristically cutting. It seems Longbottom's incompetence can occasionally make someone else's minor stability stand out, but it was enough for Jiang Wu. Whether Slughorn's sugary flattery or Snape's bitter winter, Jiang Wu met both with a near-meditative calm. She took what was useful, filtered out the rest, and advanced steadily in this strange, bifurcated curriculum of potions and defense against the dark arts. Quietly, methodically, her strength understated but solid, like the spiritual plants she tended, growing silently and waiting for their moment. The spirit of Christmas could not quite lift the gloom that hung over Hogwarts. Snow blanketed the grounds, and the castle corridors were strung with holly and mistletoe, but the festive decorations failed to drown out the nervous, hushed conversations. The Daily Prophet carried ever more frequent reports of accidents and peculiar weather, and those who knew how to read between the lines understood the danger they hinted at. The murder of Madame Amelia Bones, Susan Bones' aunt and a distant cousin of Jiang Wu's mother, had sent a chill through everyone connected to the Order of the Phoenix and to informed families. Professor Slughorn tried to steady spirits in his usual way. His Christmas party was as lavish as ever. His office glowed with golden light and tinkling magical music, the air thick with the scents of roasted chestnuts, peppermints, mulled wine, and too strong perfume. Guests wore their best robes and tried to smile, but laughter came short and eyes kept darting. Conversation circled safely around NATs, gifts, and trivial gossip. As always, Cedric Diggory drew attention. He looked healthier than when he first returned, more color in his cheeks, but a solemn crease remained between his brows. Dressed in dark green formal robes, he moved easily through groups, answering the same questions about his miraculous recovery with the graciousness of someone trying to pretend life was ordinary again. The Hufflepuffs clustered around him, glad to have their champion back, and their presence provided cover. Jiangwu kept to a quiet corner near the long table of refreshments. Tonight, she wore a modified Chinese-style gown of silver-gray brocade with subtle patterns. Her hair was swept up and held with a simple white jade hairpin. Her cool, detached manner felt incongruous among the party's sugary cheer. She sipped a non-alcoholic drink scented faintly of plum and watched the crowd as if it were a rare, night-blooming plant in the greenhouse. At last, Cedric slipped free of his admirers and spotted her. He carried 2 drinks and walked over with casual ease. "I thought you'd be hiding behind pumpkin pasties," he said, offering one of the cups with a hint of teasing in his voice. Jiangwu took it. Their fingers brushed briefly. "Too much sugar affects judgment," she said plainly, as though noting a fact. Cedric laughed and stood with her at the window, watching the falling snow. "Yes, the sugar levels here are a little high," he agreed, nodding toward the gaudy merriment beyond the glass. For a moment, they simply enjoyed the quiet between them, the party reduced to background noise. "Happy Christmas, Jiangwu," he said softly, looking at her profile rimed by the wintry light. "You too. How's your recovery?" she asked. "Still under Madame Pomfrey's and my mother's combined force-feeding," he made a helpless face. "I feel like I'm about to be pickled in tonics. But I'm much better, really. Thank you for the tea before and for everything." His voice dropped on the last word. Jiangwu inclined her head. After a brief pause, she took a slender box wrapped in deep blue brocade from her sleeve and handed it to him. "For you." Cedric surprised her with how still he went, surprise and delight crossing his face. He held the box. It was warm and smooth. "This is," he asked. "A Christmas gift," Jiangwu said evenly, though her eyes softened a fraction. "I thought you might find it useful." He untied the ribbon carefully. Inside, on black velvet, lay an exquisitely fashioned pair of gardening shears. The handle was obsidian, polished until it fit the hand like a glove. Cool at first, then quick to warm. The blades were forged from a strange, thin, resilient metal that shone with a cool mithril-like luster. Faint silver runes were etched along the cutting edge. The runes seemed to flow minutely, their magic keeping cuts clean and aiding a plant's recovery. Set into the end of the handle was a tiny seed of self-regenerating soil, the same provenance as the small seed in the brooch Jiangwu wore, giving off a faint, comforting, earthy warmth. Cedric breathed in sharply. He could feel the precise craftsmanship and the power woven into the shears. "This is too much," he murmured. "My father had an old friend, a retired alchemy master. Make them," Cedric explained, coloring slightly. "I told him I wanted to give a present to a very special friend, someone who looks after rather peculiar plants. The master said the best tools must go to someone who understands land and life. He himself carved the ancient runes, supposed to soothe pruned plants, lessen their pain and magical drain. I thought your little ones might need a gentler touch." He gave a small, embarrassed smile. "I hope you'll use them." The gift surpassed Jiangwu's expectations. It was valuable, yes, but what mattered was the thought behind it, recognition of her skill and respect for the way she cared for plants. For a moment, something like warmth rippled through her cool reserve. She lifted the shears, tracing the cold mithril blade, the smooth obsidian handle, and finally resting her finger against the tiny seed. Its pulse of power felt kin to her own. The sincerity behind the gift felt heavy and real. "Thank you," she said, and the steely clarity of her eyes thawed into a rare, soft gleam. "It's perfect. One of the best gifts I've ever received." She laid the shears back in their box and put them away. Then, as though deciding on a return, she drew a small brocade pouch embroidered with a silver orchid from another sleeve and offered it to Cedric. A return gift, she said quietly. 100 herbs pouch. Inside is an incense blend I've just formulated, mixed with concentrated flower cores, Arctic moonlight moss, and a little powdered, purifying glazed grass from deep in Chixia stream. Worn close to the body, it calms the mind, steadies the spirit, and offers some resistance to mental interference and nightmares. For a soul still mending and consolidating, that was exactly what he needed. Cedric took the pouch, and the scent rose, clear and serene, carrying a slow, purifying calm that seemed to pass through the air and into him. The heavy, aching fatigue that had been lodged in his chest eased. "Thank you, Jiangwu," he said, his brown eyes holding hers with warmth and something more complicated. I needed this. I'll keep it with me." They stood together by the snowy window, having exchanged perhaps the most meaningful gifts either had ever received. There were no grand speeches or intimate gestures, only a quiet, mutual understanding that had settled between them like a root. Outside the glass, the party went on. Inside, their small, shared moment felt like the truest comfort in a dark time. They both knew the road ahead would be hard, but they had found at least that they would not walk it alone. Chapter 68, Newt's Pressure and Special Tutoring. Winter at Hogwarts slid into the second half of the school year with a surface calm that barely concealed a growing tension. For 7th years, the NED exams hung over everything like an approaching storm, its weight increasing by the day. The library smelled of parchment, ink, and a different sort of fear. Stacks of revision notes grew taller than the pumpkin juice cups on the tables. Cedric Diggory, one of the year's brightest, felt that pressure acutely. He was clever and had a solid foundation, but the time he had lost, being unconscious for too long after that last ordeal, had set him back where sustained practice mattered most. Charms and transfiguration rewarded repetition and the latest technique. Catching up meant long hours bent over books. The window seat in the library had become almost his permanent post. Opposite him, more and more often, sat Jiangwu. It had become an unspoken amusement in the Hufflepuff common room, their prefect and star seeker, the ever-neat Cedric, spending hours with the house's mysterious girl from the east, and, apparently, the one receiving help. "Merlin, I've mixed up the secondary derivation principles of the transfiguration spell again," Cedric muttered, ruffling his still neat hair as if a bothersome fly had burrowed in it. "This is worse than dealing with a blast-ended scroot." Jiangwu looked up from an old, oddly scented Eastern herbal volume and at the dense, impatient notes arrayed before Cedric. She set the book down, waved her wand once, and a faint stream of rue smoke rose from the small censer on their table, known to sharpen memory. "Start from the fundamentals," she said, calm as if stating a simple fact. "It's not about memorizing derivations. It's about understanding the flow. Your thinking is confined by the rigid classifications of the Western system." She picked up a quill and, with a few deliberate strokes, sketched a series of compact symbols on a clean sheet of parchment. "Try the 5 elements cycle," she continued. "Metal, solidity, generates water, transformation. Water nourishes wood, growth. The force of a spell isn't fragmented, it intergenerates and transforms." Cedric stared at the symbols, frowning as the pieces turned in his mind. Then his face brightened. "I get it. So higher transfiguration isn't about forcing a form, it's about guiding the object's inner properties to evolve in the direction you want." He blinked, a grin spreading. "Merlin, that makes everything so clear." He tapped a bronze nut on the table with the tip of his wand and spoke the incantation. This time, instead of producing a blurred half-metal, half-creature abomination as before, the coin shifted cleanly and became a small, silver spider that skittered forward in a slightly awkward but unmistakably insectile way. "It worked," Cedric said, looking at Jiangwu as if she demonstrated wizarding alchemy. "You're a genius, Jiangwu. Professor Flitwick never explained it like that." "Just another way of looking at it," Jiangwu replied coolly, returning to her book, though there was the faintest lift at the corner of her mouth. A cackle split the air as Peeves zoomed over a bookshelf, hurling a handful of melting snowballs that struck a cluster of Ravenclaws hunched over their own piles of notes. Cedric, as prefect, bristled and began to rise to restore order. Jiangwu stopped him with a single look. Without raising her head further, She idly twitched her fingers, and the small pot of fuzzy, pale blue moss sitting between them, a bit of decorative foliage, vibrated minutely. The next instant, Peeves' outstretched hand went madly itchy. He began to snap and scratch, squealing and waving his hands so furiously that he forgot his snowballs and shot through a portrait hole in a shriek, his departure louder than his arrival. Cedric stared at the moss in astonishment. "Itching moss," Jiangwu said, as if she were pointing out the weather. "Just a little spore dust, quiet and unnoticeable. More effective than yelling." Cedric laughed, shaking his head. Being with Jiangwu meant more than corrections in a textbook. It was a constant line of small, ingenious tricks and different ways of thinking. Her special tutoring filled the gaps his missed classes had left and opened up a wider, stranger view of magic than the curricula usually offered. Their study partnership drew attention. Hermione glanced over sometimes with a mixture of curiosity and envy. She was genuinely interested in Jiangwu's methods, while Harry and Ginny exchanged a knowing, "I told you so" look. Most students simply saw it as Hufflepuff helping one of their own, commendable camaraderie. Only a few people noticed the quieter thing between them, an undercurrent that felt, to those few, like something more than ordinary friendship. Chapter 69, Quidditch and Lucky Charms. Spring meant Quidditch season was back. Even with the shadow of war hanging over the school, the pitch remained one of the students' few escapes. Cedric Diggory, Hufflepuff's seeker and once their captain, couldn't give up the game entirely despite the pressure of NEUTs. He turned up at practices often, giving concise, practical tips to the current captain and the team. "Lower your wrist, Abbott. A broom isn't a doorknob. Don't twist it like one. Watch the clouds. Don't fixate on the bludgers. Track the snitch's path." His advice hit home. The team trusted him. One afternoon, Hufflepuff held a practice match against Gryffindor. Harry and Cedric, both seekers, shot into the air together. It felt a little like the Triwizard Tournament replayed, except the mood was lighter and friendlier. The match was intense. Ginny Weasley, an excellent chaser, attacked relentlessly and kept the score climbing. Ron, guarding the hoops, looked flustered. He saved several dangerous shots, but let a few through that he shouldn't have. Harry and Cedric circled high above, wary of one another and blocking each other's angles without speaking. Then a deflected bludger came whistling in at a tricky angle, heading straight for Cedric's back. "Cedric, look out!" someone below shouted. Cedric heard the whoosh and slammed his broom down to dive. But his movement was half a beat late. He was about to be hit. In the stands, Jiangwu barely registered a furrow in her brow. She pressed something in her robe pocket, some dried, winged seeds, between her fingers. Immediately beneath Cedric, an unexpected updraft roared up. It lifted his broom as if caught by an invisible hand, accelerating him out of the bludger's path and pushing him hard enough that he nearly bit his tongue. The bludger skimmed past the tail of his broom. "Blimey!" Cedric righted himself and drew a deep breath, heart still racing. That wind came at just the right moment. Harry swooped closer. "Are you all right?" "Fine," Cedric answered, patting his chest. Hogwarts weather, always full of surprises. He glanced toward the stands and saw Jiangwu fidgeting with a small, hastily woven straw amulet, apparently oblivious to the close call. The match went on. Whether it was that lucky gust or Cedric finding his rhythm again, a few minutes later, he was the first to spot the golden snitch. It was looping around one of Gryffindor's hoops. What followed was a breathtaking chase. Harry followed close behind. The two streaked across the sky like meteors, speed drawing gasps and cheers from the stands. In the end, with a touch more experience and perhaps the memory of that earlier lift, Cedric plunged in and snatched the snitch with a daring dive, fingers closing on the tiny gold ball just ahead of Harry. Hufflepuff erupted. Even a practice win tasted sweet. Cedric eased his broom down, gripping the snitch, face lit with that old pure joy that comes from a good Quidditch match and the spray of sweat from exertion. His teammates crowded around to clap him on the back. He smiled, thanked them, then made his way to the edge of the pitch, searching the stands. Jiangwu stood watching quietly. Cedric walked up to her and held out the still fluttering snitch, cheeks flushed and grin wide. "For my goddess of luck," he said, half joking. "That wind. Thank you." Jingwu looked from the small golden ball to his bright, sweaty face. She didn't take the snitch. Instead, she slipped the faintly fragrant, freshly woven straw amulet into his hand. "It just happened to be windy," she said calmly, though a slight color rose in her ears. "Wear this. It calms the mind and steadies the nerves, more practical than catching a snitch." Cedric turned the amulet over in his palm. It still bore the warmth of her fingertips. He noticed the careful weaving, small leaves of calming grass, and tiny stems of yarrow tucked into the straw, herbs said to bring luck. Something in him softened completely. "I'll treasure it," he said, sincere, and tucked it into his inner pocket beside his herb pouch. The small, bright pleasure of Quidditch eased the gloom for a little while, and something else, a quiet warmth, kindled between the sport and the simple exchange. For Cedric, this afternoon had become about much more than catching a snitch. Chapter 70, Dumbledore's Request and Undercurrents. Although Jiang Wu's power over living soil had slowed the curse, Dumbledore's blackened hand remained beyond repair, and his absences from Hogwarts grew more frequent, each return leaving him visibly more worn and older. The castle's atmosphere grew heavier for it. One evening, a silvery phoenix Patronus led Jiang Wu once more to the headmaster's office. The Patronus spoke the password, "Lemon Drop," and the gargoyle at the door eased aside. Dumbledore sat behind his desk, the malformed hand sheathed in a dragonhide glove and resting on the wood. He looked more haggard than before, but his blue eyes were still keen. "Good evening, Miss Jiang. Please have a seat." He smiled faintly. "Thank you again for your help earlier. It bought me valuable time." Jiang Wu nodded and took the offered chair. She noticed Fawkes was absent from his perch. The office felt emptier for it. "I've asked you here to make a request, perhaps a presumptuous one." Dumbledore spoke slowly, his gaze behind half-moon spectacles fixed on her. "It concerns your particular ability to communicate with and influence plants." Jiang Wu listened in silence. "I suspect that Lord Voldemort, Tom Riddle, during his time at Hogwarts took a special interest in the dark arts, particularly Horcruxes," Dumbledore said quietly. "I believe he may have hidden one within Hogwarts, in a place closely tied to Salazar Slytherin." A chill went through Jiang Wu. As she had feared, Dumbledore was hunting Horcruxes. "That place is saturated with dark, twisted magic," he continued, eyes shadowed. "There are ancient things there, corrupted and mutated by that power. I have tried to enter, but some of the guardians react violently. They are unusually sensitive to conventional magic. I need a gentler, more subtle means to sense them, perhaps to soothe or bypass them, so we can confirm what's there and plan our next steps." He looked at her. "I've seen the way you calm mandrakes, and I've heard of the unusual little ones in your greenhouse. Your power, rooted in life and earth, is the opposite of that pure darkness. It may have effects we cannot predict. I am asking you to try, in your own way, to sense whatever passes for plants in that place, to give us information, and maybe to open a path." It was a dangerous assignment, tied to Horcruxes and the darkest secrets of the Dark Lord. Jiang Wu sat still, not wavering over whether to agree, but weighing risks and considering how she might proceed. "I need a more specific location and to know the nature of these guardians," she said at last, her voice steady. Dumbledore named the place softly. "The entrance to Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets lies behind the girls' lavatory on the second floor. The real danger is deeper, beneath the plumbing. The vegetation there is full of resentment and a hunger for blood, an extreme mutation of Devil's Snare, tainted with basilisk venom and eroded by dark arts. It is lethal and resists outside interference." Basilisk venom. Mutated Devil's Snare. Jiang Wu's brow tightened. Her gift favored vitality and purification. How it would affect such warped, malignant growths was uncertain and might even provoke a backlash. "I can't guarantee success," she said honestly. "I understand." Dumbledore's nod was slow. Even confirming their condition would be invaluable. "Please, prioritize your safety. Withdraw at the first sign of danger." Jiang Wu left the headmaster's office with a weight in her chest. The shadow of war was edging into the heart of Hogwarts itself. Dumbledore's request had placed her, and her uncommon gift, squarely on the front line against Voldemort. She needed time to prepare, to marshal stronger spirit plants from her greenhouse, and to choose the right moment to probe the legendary and deadly entrance to the Chamber of Secrets. All of it would have to be done in secrecy, keeping Snape and any Death Eater informants in the dark. Beneath the oldest stones of Hogwarts, undercurrents were stirring. Chapter 71: Whispers of the Jungle and Silent Guardian. After accepting Dumbledore's commission, Jiang Wu did not rush into action. Impulsiveness was the worst food for Devil's Snare, her first lesson from tending dangerous plants. She had to prepare, to plan meticulously. For the next few days, she reverted to the Hufflepuff who lived for soil and seeds, spending most of her time in the greenhouse and in the restricted section of the library, under Dumbledore's special pass. She read everything on Devil's Snare variants, scarce and vague notes on basilisks and ancient protective magics, especially the obscure records about clashes between life energy and the dark arts. On her workbench were the results of that research. An iron moss with metallic, slightly trembling leaves she hoped would resist tearing and corruption. Several flash spores sealed in hard pods that required special activation, useful against photophobic creatures or to create temporary blindness, and a small vial of concentrated moon dew extract, radiating calm, infused with a measure of her own spiritual power and a faint trace of the breathing earthseed's vitality. Timing mattered, too. She needed a night when Filch and Madame Norris patrols and the professor's rounds would leave gaps. The Marauder's map became essential. Under the pretense of studying Peeves's movement patterns to help collect dew at night, she borrowed Harry's map. Harry found it odd but agreed, and spent several nights memorizing patrol patterns. On a deep Tuesday with the moon hidden behind clouds, she moved. Dressed in a dark, fitted outfit under her robe, hair tied back, all catching jewelry removed, she carried an equipment bag with the cultivated plants, necessary potions, including a mandrake restorative, just in case, and her wand. Avoiding Peeves and Madame Norris, she reached the famous girls' lavatory on the second floor, where the moaning Myrtle hovered in a swirl of cold, damp air and faint sobs. Myrtle was predictably dramatic. "Oh, another one here for a show? Or have you finally decided to jump in the toilet?" she shrieked, floating out of a stall. Jiang Wu ignored her and fixed her gaze on the brass faucet carved with a small snake. She pointed her wand and hissed, "Open." The sink moved aside, revealing a vast, bottomless black pipe. A putrid mix of old grime, damp stone, reptilian stink, and dark decay rushed out, making her stomach turn. She didn't flinch. She swallowed a cleansing pellet to steady herself against poison gas and mental erosion, sprinkled concealing powder to dim her life aura, and without hesitation slid into the chute. The descent was long and harsh. She landed on something soft and slippery. Lumos. The tip of her wand cast light over the scene. It was worse than she had feared. The floor wasn't moss, but a slimy, dark purple fungal mat that pulsed faintly and gave underfoot. Thick, dark green vines climbed the walls, but they bore no leaves, only pale, bone-like spines, and writhed like snakes. The air was dense with despair and violent emotion. These were plants only in form. Basilisk venom, the dark arts, and years of resentment had turned them alien and hateful. Their malice pushed against her like a physical thing. Her presence was a clear drop in hot oil. The nearest bone-spined vine snapped forward like a venomous snake, tips aiming at her. The fungal mat beneath her feet began to writhe and curl around her ankles. Jiang Wu did not cast fire or other offensive spells. Those would only enrage the things. Instead, she let a few drops of moon dew fall before her and pressed both hands to the damp ground, channeling her spiritual power and the steady force of the breathing earth seed. She let a simple, firm intention roll outward. Peace, sleep, fearlessness. Not words, but pure energetic fluctuation. The effect was immediate and resisted. The bone-spined vines trembled as if in a furious struggle. Their advance slowed, and the pale tips dulled. The fungal mat's writhing became sluggish. The dark plants recoiled from this strange, pure life force, even as it lured something calmer back into their cores. It was taxing work. Facing so much corrupted growth and emotion on a conscious level drained her quickly. Sweat beaded on her brow as she maintained the calming current and edged deeper, feeling for the heart of the corruption. Unseen above, someone held his breath and watched through a slight gap. Cedric. He'd been in the library that evening, finishing an essay, and noticed her odd expression when she borrowed the Marauder's map. Seeing the dangerous books she'd been consulting, he'd followed, worrying. He'd watched her enter the lavatory, seen the pipe open, and saw her slide inside. He'd wanted to descend at once, but common sense told him a sudden intrusion might ruin her plan or put her in danger, so he stayed at the mouth, wand ready, prepared to jump if needed. Deeper in, Jiang Wu's moon dew began to lose power. The dark aura thickened and resistance rose. She realized the core was sealed by an extraordinarily strong dark energy barrier she couldn't quietly breach with her current strength. Still, she had learned what she needed: the distribution and intensity of the mutated plants, evidence that they guarded something powerful, and the cold, evil imprint of the Dark Lord lingering on the barrier, just as Dumbledore had suspected. With her objective met, she began a careful retreat, continuing to send out calming intentions to prevent a backlash. When she slid back out of the pipe onto the cold lavatory floor, exhausted, the first thing she saw was Cedric's hazel eyes, full of worry, fear, and a flash of anger. "You," he choked out, voice tight. "Do you know how dangerous it is down there? Does Professor Dumbledore know you? When alone?" His anger trembled on the edge of panic. Jiang Wu, surprised to find him there, felt the tension of the night ease when she saw his expression. She brushed dust off her robe and said calmly, "He knows. It's a mission. I was prepared." "Prepared?" Cedric's voice rose briefly, then dipped low, careful not to wake Myrtle. "Prepared with those plants to reason with those things? I almost—" He stopped, not finishing that he'd almost gone down after her. "They responded to reason," Jiang Wu replied, indicating her unharmed self. "More effective than spells. And," she added, looking at him, "you're here." Those words settled him like a small silencing charm. His worry and anger softened under the quiet trust in her voice. He let out a long breath, shoulders easing as he rubbed his forehead. "Next time, at least tell me. I can keep watch outside. I don't want to be a burden. I just want to make sure you're safe." She agreed. She glanced at the deep night beyond the window. "We should go. Filch will be patrolling the North Tower soon." They slipped out of the lavatory together and melted into the castle shadows as if they had never been there. Whatever else had happened that night, the secret descent and the vigil above left them with a new, unspoken bond. Chapter 72. Newt's Storm and Alternative Treatments for Exam Anxiety. Exam month for owls and NUTs finally roared in like one of Hagrid's blast-ended scroots, breathing fire at every 5th and 7th year student. Hogwarts slipped into a collective frenzy of tension. There wasn't an empty chair in the library. Dark circles and muttered spells lined every corridor. In the common rooms, homework conversation drowned out idle chatter. Even the air seemed to taste of parchment and worry. Hufflepuff's common room, with its warm, cozy atmosphere, became a favored study haven, not just for Hufflepuffs. Cedric Diggory, with his near-perfect marks, patient nature, and the legendary halo of having escaped death, unwittingly turned into a free tutoring center. "Diggory, I can't get this transfiguration model stable." "Cedric, what are the key points for silent spellcasting and charms? Professor Flitwick went too fast." "Help, Diggory, this ancient runes translation looks like troll scribbles." Cedric answered each plea patiently, so often that his own revision time dwindled. His kindness and sense of duty made him unable to refuse. Jiang Wu usually sat a short distance away, reading her Eastern classics or quietly tending the few little spiritual plants she carried. She watched the crowd grow around Cedric, watched him keep smiling even as his notes lagged behind, and frowned. When yet another Ravenclaw girl pressed a thick stack of arithmancy problems into his hands and practically leaned on him, Jiang Wu closed her book. She rose with a cup of freshly brewed herbal tea, bitter, strangely sharp, yet oddly bracing, and walked to Cedric's side. She set the cup in front of him, with a voice soft but unarguably sharp, said, "Drink it." The murmuring hushed for a moment. "Your spiritual energy, your energy is overdrawn. You look like you've been kissed by a Grindylow." Cedric blinked, then took the cup. The invigorating scent cleared his fogged mind significantly. He gave Jiang Wu a grateful look. She turned to the cluster of expectant students and announced, calmly, "Tutoring time is over. From now on, it's quiet study time. If you need to ask questions, there'll be a consultation fee, 1 acorn per person, or half an hour of greenhouse tending." The students froze. Consultation fee? Acorns? Tending plants? Why? A Hufflepuff boy murmured. Cedric didn't say anything, because if his NUT grades drop because he tutors you for free, Jingwu said without fluster, persuasion threading her words, you won't have free diggory next term. This is sustainable development. She glanced toward a few Gryffindors who were inching closer to eavesdrop and added, Gryffindors pay double. Cedric nearly spat out his tea at the last line and had to cover his mouth, shoulders shaking as he tried to control his laughter. The Ravenclaw's face went pink. She called Jiang Wu stingy under her breath and slunk away. The others exchanged looks. Odd rules, yes, but Jiang Wu's implacable expression and Cedric's obvious need for rest convinced them. They moved apart and returned to their own studies. Quiet descended. Cedric exhaled as if a weight had been lifted. He leaned toward Jiang Wu and whispered, Thanks. But sustainable development? Gryffindor's double. Where did you learn those terms? Notes from Muggle Studies, Introduction to Economics, Jiang Wu said, resuming her seat as if nothing unusual had happened. And the Weasley twins' price list gave me inspiration. She paused, then added with an almost clinical observation, Your study progress is 12.7% behind schedule. Inefficient. Cedric rubbed his nose, unable to argue. All right, Professor Jiang is right. May I pay to ask you a question? He actually produced a smooth acorn from his pocket and put it on the table. About the final stabilization for the wolfsbane potion. Jiang Wu glanced at the acorn. The corner of her mouth twitched. For the sake of this consultation fee. First, you need to rethink your fundamentals from the perspective of Eastern medicinal principles, monarch, minister, assistant, and guide. And so a peculiar one-on-one, paid tutoring session began. Though Jiang Wu's approach often felt unconventional, it cut straight to the heart of the problem and brought Cedric sudden clarity. The other students, no longer bold enough to demand free help, leaned in anyway and found themselves listening avidly, catching tips that applied across subjects. A quiet trend took hold in the Hufflepuff Tower. Snacks or small crafts exchanged for brief consultations with the girl who'd arbitrarily become their tutor. Study efficiency rose. Cedric not only caught up with his schedule, but under Jiang Wu's alternative treatment, much of his pre-exam anxiety evaporated. With a calm private tutor who could zero in on the essentials and who accepted acorns as payment, even the storm of NETs didn't feel quite so terrifying. Chapter 73. Decisions and Unspoken Promises. Under Candlelight. The NEWT exams had finally ended, amid a mixture of groans and relief. The seventh years felt as if they had survived a brutal battle, exhausted, oddly hollow after shedding such a heavy weight. Results would not be published for weeks, and yet more practical questions were already crowding their minds. What came next after graduation? The shadow of the war made the future uncertain. The Ministry of Magic kept up its reassurances, but a rising number of accidents and missing person reports left anyone with sense uneasy. Hogwarts felt like the last comparatively safe place. Leaving it meant stepping straight into the turmoil beyond. Cedric Diggory had received more than one offer. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement at the Ministry had extended an olive branch, hoping the boy who lived might become an example. St. Mungo's had offered an internship, valuing his aptitude for potions and healing. His parents, who had already endured so much, wanted nothing more than to see him choose a secure, stable path. One evening, Cedric invited Jiang Wu to a quiet corridor in the West Wing. Few people came this way. Outside the tall windows, the sun was sinking over the black lake, painting the water gold and crimson. Cedric held several thick envelopes in his hand. His expression was unusually solemn and adult. They all want me to make the right choice, he said, leaning against the cold stone and offering the letters to Jiang Wu. His voice was low. Something safe, respectable, nowhere near trouble. Jiang Wu skimmed the invitations, handsome offers, generous terms, and handed them back without expression. Your decision? She asked plainly. He did not answer right away. He turned to watch the lake, the sunset burning on the surface. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice steadying with resolve. If this were a year ago, I might have chosen the easier path, but now. He faced her, and his gaze was fierce. I've seen the deepest kind of darkness. I know it's real, and it's spreading. Hiding, pretending not to see, that won't make anyone safe. It'll only let the darkness swallow more of what I care about. He drew a slow breath, as though sealing the choice. I got a letter from Professor Dumbledore. The Order of the Phoenix needs people. People who can work outside, who can run missions and link scattered groups. It's dangerous. It might even be fatal. But I've decided. I'm going to join. He had made the choice he might have in the original timeline, but now it was unpressured by the Ministry. An active, deliberate decision. He looked at Jiang Wu with an apology and determination, a trace of nervousness as though waiting for her verdict. Jiang Wu listened, the sunset throwing a warm rim around her cool profile. She was silent for a moment. As Cedric felt his heart lift, she reached into her small bag and took something out. It wasn't an herb pouch or a charm, but a delicate bracelet woven from a flexible green vine. Set into it were a few never-withering, calming grass leaves and a tiny moonstone that glowed faintly white. For you, she held it out, a graduation gift. Cedric accepted it. It was cool and springy to the touch. He could feel a faint, steady, calming magic in it, more refined and potent than the usual sachets and trinkets. What is it? He asked. Thorn Guard, Jiang Wu said. If you're hit by a malicious charm or strong dark art, it will automatically throw up a brief, powerful shield and send me a warning. The moonstone steadies the mind, so it's harder to be affected by things like Imperio. She added, the materials have been treated, it can't be tracked. The gift meant more than its parts. It was support, understanding, and a promise of protection. Cedric felt his throat tighten. He slipped the bracelet onto his left wrist. It fit as if made for him. Thank you, he said. The two small words carried everything he didn't say. He took a faltering step closer. The corridor felt suddenly narrower, the air charged. Jiang Wu, he said quietly, serious in a way she had rarely heard, wait for me to come back. When this is over, I want to tell you a lot in person. There were no grand speeches or sudden embraces, just the weight of sincerity, clearer than any flourish. Jiang Wu met his earnest look. Her ears were faintly flushed in the dying light, but her gaze did not waver. She nodded gently. Noted. And don't forget to leave your potion notes with me. A faint, almost imperceptible smile flickered in her eyes. Also, come back alive, and pay back all the consultation fees you owe me, one by one. Cedric started, then let out a short, surprised laugh that eased the tension in his chest. The solemnity broke into warmth. He studied her face as if to keep it forever. All right, it's a deal, with interest. The sun finally slid beneath the lake, and the corridor dimmed. They stood side by side in the growing twilight, saying nothing more, but a steady, silent strength passed between them. The road ahead was uncertain and dangerous, but for the moment they had an unspoken agreement that would light their way. The day of graduation and departure had finally arrived. The Hogwarts Express, belching steam, eased into Hogsmeade Station, marking the end of another school year, and for some, the close of campus life. The platform thrummed with people. Seventh years hugged friends, exchanged contact details, and promised to keep in touch, many with red-rimmed eyes and choked voices. The shadow of war made every farewell heavier, more reluctant. Cedric Diggory stood out, tall and composed amid the bustle. He had changed out of his robes into a fitted, dark muggle travel suit that made him look less like a boy and more like someone who could be trusted to look after himself. He was saying his last goodbyes to Cho Chang and the Hufflepuff team. Keep training, don't slack off, Cedric said, patting the current chaser on the shoulder. Abbott, you've got a lot of potential. Try to be captain next year. Don't worry, Diggory, we'll work hard for you and for us, they answered in unison. Cho stepped forward, hugged him, and whispered, Take care, Cedric. Be careful. You too, Cho. Cedric returned the hug. Thank you for everything. His gaze swept the platform and found the figure standing quietly in the shadow of a carriage. Jiang Wu hadn't squeezed into the throng. She just stood apart, still as if the sorrow and commotion didn't touch her. She held a small square parcel wrapped in oiled paper. Cedric nodded once to his friends and moved through the crowd toward her. The noise of the platform seemed to fade around them. They looked at each other in silence until a sharp, prolonged whistle demanded the last passengers. Here. Jiang Wu handed him the package, voice level and even. Eat this on the way. Cedric turned the parcel in his hands. It was slightly heavy and smelled of grain and nuts with a faint sweetness, and he could feel a gentle warmth, an undercurrent of spiritual energy. What is it? Rations. My improved marching pill, she said. Fills you up, keeps you going, slowly restores stamina, more filling than chocolate frogs. I mixed in strengthening herbs and a little vitality from the breath soil. Use it sparingly. Her tone was flat but careful. The gift was made for long, hard journeys. He tucked the parcel into his bag beside the Thorn Guardian bracelet and the herbal pouch. Thank you, more useful than any trinket. Another urgent whistle cut through the air. The conductor's voice called for the last students to board. Cedric took a deep breath and looked at her as if trying to imprint her face in his memory. I'm leaving. 3 words that summed everything. Jiang Wu nodded. There was no hug, no lingering farewell, not even another sentence. Cedric held her gaze, then turned with resolve and strode toward the carriage door. He didn't look back. He knew one glance might undo him. Jiang Wu watched his broad back disappear into the compartment, watched the train belch out a great plume of white steam, pick up speed, shrink into the distance, and finally become a small black dot on the horizon. The platform emptied. The ache of parting hung like damp mist. She did not go home immediately. From her pocket, she took a plain, slightly shriveled brown seed, something Cedric had slipped her a few days earlier, a seed from the oldest oak in the Diggory garden, said to have been planted the year he was born. If I don't come back, he had said then, half light, half serious, plant it somewhere sunny. It's hardy. At the time, she had only taken it. Now she cupped the seed in her palm, covered it with her other hand, and closed her eyes. A soft green glow bled from her skin into the tiny orb. The breath soil's vitality braided with her own spiritual energy like a gentle spring rain, coaxing life from dormancy. When she opened her hand, the seed was plump and glossy, its skin a healthy dark brown, a hairline crack at the tip showing a hair-like white sprout. A surge of life energy flashed and was instantly reined in by her. She regarded the tiny life with a calm, steady look. There is no if, she murmured to the embryo, as if making a promise. I will wait for you to grow into a towering tree. Carefully, she placed the germinated seed into a small, warm, slightly damp cloth pouch and kept it close against her. Then she turned and walked alone back toward Hogwarts Castle. Her steps were sure. Parting was sorrowful, but life must go on. There were people to protect, studies unfinished, and a little world of creatures in need of tending. The war had forced them apart, but it had also clarified paths and responsibilities. Cedric had gone on his journey. Here at Hogwarts, Jiang Wu would take root, grow, wait, and become stronger. A new story was beginning. Chapter 75, Summer Silence and Undercurrents. Summer vacation brought no peace to Hogwarts. If anything, it fell over the school like a heavy curtain, muffling the ordinary clamor and letting the currents beneath the surface grow more turbulent. Most students had gone home. The castle was unnaturally empty and quiet, its corridors echoing only with solitary footsteps and the low whispers of portraits. Harry's mood matched the silence. The Dursleys remained unbearable. The Daily Prophet and the occasional, furtive messages from Hermione and Ron offered nothing but bad news. More accidents, the Ministry's steady vilification of Dumbledore and Harry, and the Order of the Phoenix running into obstacle after obstacle. He felt stranded in a hostile bubble, powerless, angry, and increasingly isolated. Hermione and Ron were not faring any better. Their families watched them closely. Contact with the outside world was limited to encrypted notes or the rare, heavily monitored owl post. The usual warmth at the burrow had dimmed. Bill and Charlie were away, Percy was estranged, the twins' jokes were muted, and Ginny had grown noticeably quieter. The household felt heavy with worry and fatigue. At the Diggorys, relief that Cedric had returned safely was tempered by unease. Cedric remained gentle and polite, helping his father in the garden, keeping his manners with his mother, but he had changed. Quiet reveries took him often. His eyes sharpened with wariness, and he found himself looking out the window more than usual. Letters arrived regularly from friends, and after reading them, he would fall into long silence or slip out for hours at a time. His parents worried, but dared not press him. They tucked their concern away and offered what quiet support they could. In the Ministry, Cornelius Fudge's resignation had given way to Rufus Scrimgeour, who tried to strike a tougher, more pragmatic tone. He stopped denying the possibility of Voldemort's return, but shifted the emphasis to maintaining stability and controlling public opinion. He attempted to present Harry as a unifying symbol. Harry refused, and the relationship between them became strained. The Auror office felt the strain as well. Casualty reports trickled in, adding to the grim mood. Death Eater activity grew more frequent and more cunning. They moved beyond bombings and street attacks to infiltrate key departments, intimidate or coerce pureblood families, and spread chaos and fear. It was as if they were searching for something or carrying out a secret plan. Nocturne Alley had become a dark stronghold, and Borgin and Burks prospered in ways that made even the Ministry uneasy. Only a handful of students remained at Hogwarts for the summer. Jiang Wu was one of them, claiming to stay on for important cross-seasonal magical plant cultivation research. On the surface, her days were steady and unremarkable. Long hours in the greenhouses and the library, tending increasingly strange and potent plants, poring over ancient texts, and carefully logging her findings. But she alone knew how much lay beneath that calm exterior. Dumbledore sent occasional patronuses, brief, cryptic instructions and inquiries, all tied to preparations for countering Voldemort. Using the living soil of the greenhouses, Jiang Wu had quietly transplanted several plants with protective and warning properties near hidden exits and secret passages. She had even begun breeding a vine with a faint sensitivity to malice and dark marks, though progress was slow and fragile. She watched the outside world in her own ways. Encrypted messages with Tonks covered the application of herbs to dark arts injuries, threaded with codes only they understood. Younger Hufflepuffs who came to help in the greenhouses brought fragmented rumors from home, half-heard fears and hints that left a sourness in the air. This summer felt like the smothering heat before a storm. Beneath the silence, fear spread, power gathered in shadowed places, conspiracies thickened in the corners. Everyone could sense an invisible tightening, as if a giant net were slowly drawing closed. Hogwarts, a castle 1,000 years old, stood like a silent giant, waiting for the violence that everyone felt coming. Chapter 76, The Unexpected Visitor and Slughorn's Memories. It was a stifling August afternoon, the heat hanging so thick it was hard to breathe. Jiang Wu was working in an empty classroom on the 3rd floor of the castle, which she had temporarily turned into a small experimental field. Complex array patterns had been traced on the floor with special fluorescent powder, and several spirit plants, each with a different form and energy signature, were placed carefully at the array nodes. She was testing the stability of a new protective barrier that combined Eastern array formations with the energies of magic plants. Sweat dampened the wisps of hair on her forehead, but she was completely focused, fingers tracing the final spiritual incantation through the air as she guided different attributes to merge slowly. A robust, cheerful thump, thump, thump sounded on the classroom door. Jiang Wu paused. The flow of energy through the array wavered. One of the maidenhair ferns, responsible for the barrier's resilience, rustled in displeasure. She frowned, made a quick stabilizing gesture, and went to open the door. Professor Horace Slughorn stood there in a bright yellow summer outfit that made him look even rounder. His face shone, and he fanned himself with an ornate feather fan, beaming. Good afternoon, my dear child," he exclaimed, his small eyes taking in the room with keen interest. When he saw the unfamiliar array and the strange plants, surprise and delight lit his face. "Merlin, is this some kind of ancient magic ritual? How unique." "Professor Slughorn." Jiang Wu stepped aside to let him in, her voice cool and measured. "Just a small energy guidance experiment. Do you need something?" "Oh, no. Can't I simply come to see one of my most promising students?" Slughorn chuckled, wandering closer to the plants. "Working so diligently in the summer, truly admirable. I always say, Hufflepuff's steadfastness is fully embodied in you." He leaned over the maidenhair fern and inspected its metallic sheen leaves with exaggerated care. "Marvelous, truly marvelous. I've never seen this kind of fern. The magical fluctuations, so solid. And this one." He pointed to a delicate clump of grass with tiny blue flowers at the center of the array. "This energy, so calm, it soothes the mind. Incredible. Where did you find such rare varieties?" "Family inheritance, and a few I cultivated myself," Jiang Wu answered, giving nothing away. Slughorn's eyes gleamed as he examined them. "Remarkable, remarkable," he repeated, then tapped his forehead with his fan as if remembering something. "Oh, by the way, my dear, I was just sorting some of my old collections and found something rather interesting." He rummaged for an embarrassingly long time in the pocket of his embroidered waistcoat, one of those pockets that seemed to contain the entire world, and produced a small, grimy glass vial. Inside were several shriveled, blackened objects that looked like mouse droppings. "Look at this," he said, excited. "I picked these up many, many years ago on a round-the-world trip, traded for them in a remote market in the Far East. The old merchant told me, rather mysteriously, that these were seeds of something called, soul-condensing grass, or spirit-calming flower, supposed to do marvelous things for the soul, but terribly difficult to cultivate. I tried a few times without success and then forgot about them, until today, when I saw your marvelous plants and thought perhaps in your hands they might flourish." He offered the vial to Jiang Wu. "Consider it a small investment in one of my finest students," he added with a wink, implying that any success might be shared. Jiang Wu accepted the vial and, almost before she meant to, let her spiritual senses probe the contents. Her chest tightened. These were not soul-condensing grass at all. They were anima tree seeds, extremely rare. The anima tree grew slowly, but its wood and leaves were top-tier materials for crafting artifacts that stabilized the soul and resisted mental erosion. They even had a subtle ability to repair soul damage. The species was nearly extinct even in the Eastern cultivation world. Slughorn had clearly misidentified them as ordinary calming herbs. She showed no change on her face and simply nodded. "Thank you, Professor. I'll give it a try." "Excellent, excellent." Why, Slughorn rubbed his hands together, delighted. Then, as if changing topics mid-thought, he added, "Oh, speaking of such things, Tom, that's Riddle, was very fond of delving into unconventional magical botany in his day, particularly those with, special properties. Young people are always curious about power, you understand. Perfectly understandable, perfectly understandable. Ha, ha!" He spoke lightly, as though recalling a favored pupil, his voice tinged with nostalgia. But he didn't linger. Instead, he launched into an enthusiastic invitation to a little tea party he intended to host before term started. "Just a few interesting students who are staying at the school," he said. Jiang Wu responded politely, but her mind had already tightened around the vial in her hand and the offhand remark about young Riddle. Slughorn's unexpected visit and gift were like a pebble dropped into a still pond, sending out ripples. If the anima tree's seed could be found in a Far Eastern market and had caught the interest of a student like Tom Riddle, did that hint at deeper connections to his dark researches? Lord Voldemort's curiosity about such plants, what did that conceal? After seeing the chatty professor off, Jiang Wu studied the unassuming seeds in her palm. The summer ahead would be anything but peaceful. New discoveries pointed toward darker mysteries and opportunities. The small packet of Ninglu grass seeds Slughorn had given her unexpectedly became the center of Jiang Wu's summer research. She did not rush to plant them. Instead, she spent long hours in Hogwarts' restricted section and poring over the Eastern texts she had brought with her, cross-checking every scrap of information about the so-called anima tree and its kin. Once she was certain of what she was dealing with, she grew even more cautious. Cultivating that kind of spirit wood was no simple matter. It demanded exceptionally pure ambient magic, specific soil qualities, and even the right balance of sunlight, moonlight, and starlight. The growth cycle was glacial. The sapling stage was outrageously fragile. Simply setting them into ordinary greenhouse soil, even enhanced by the breathing earth seed, risked killing them outright. She needed a gentler, more controlled approach. So she took out her small alchemical furnace, the brass censer in which she'd refined moon dew and the precision bean, and gathered moonstones of the highest grade, essence of Ninglu grass, and, in secret, soil from the edge of the forbidden forest where fallen unicorn hair had lain. That soil held the purest, most soothing magic she could find. For days, the empty classroom became her workshop. With the breathing earth seed as the core, and those other materials as support, she slowly refined a special base soil. The process required exact temperature control. She used a modified precision bean and her own spiritual manipulation to micromanage the simmering, which had to be undisturbed. The air hung heavy with a peculiar, calming scent, earth and moonlight, and herbs braided together. At the most critical moment, when she was threading the last stabilizing sigils through the mixture, Slughorn appeared again without an invitation. This time he looked more anxious than usual, though he plastered on an amiable smile. "My dear child, I hope I haven't interrupted your important horticultural research?" He waggled his hands and couldn't help glancing at the censer, from which a pale mist curled. Jiang Wu was concentrating on the finishing enchantment and only nodded. Slughorn hovered, sighed theatrically, and then, as if remembering, asked casually, "You and the Diggory lad, Cedric. You seem close. Has he been in touch since he left? I heard he turned down a position at the ministry. Such a pity. So promising. Young people are so unpredictable." She finished the spell. The light inside the furnace faded and steadied. Only then did she turn and regard him, voice even. "What would you like to know, Professor?" His grin faltered under her directness. He recovered quickly, smoothing his waistcoat. "Oh, nothing, nothing. Merely concerned for an excellent former pupil. You know how my little club likes to keep tabs. If Mr. Diggory needs anything or finds himself in any trouble, I would be most pleased to help." His tone was oily friendliness, but the intent beneath it was clear. Slughorn collected connections and dodged risks. News of Cedric rejecting the ministry and then disappearing had set his nerves wiggling. He probed indirectly through Jiang Wu, who looked close to Cedric. She knew exactly what he feared. She let him worry. Glancing at the now stable censer, she shifted the subject and spoke as if thinking aloud, vague but suggestive. "The seeds you gave me are curious. They seem to react to memories." "Memories?" Slughorn blinked, interest snagging. "In a certain energy field, they tremble and absorb nearby memory energy," she said, careful not to sound too precise. "They respond most to memories laced with regret or fear. Perhaps they could aid in healing some traumas, or maybe trace specific moments in someone's past." She kept her tone mysterious. Color drained from Slughorn's face by a fraction. His hand went, almost reflexively, to his waistcoat, to the hidden place he always touched when nerves and secrets stirred, and he forced a laugh. "Is that so? Remarkable. The world is full of wonders. Heh!" He suddenly seemed to lose interest in Cedric, exchanged a few hurried courtesies, and left with a brisk, even flustered departure. Jiang Wu watched him go, her eyes cool. She had told just enough to frighten him, to suggest those seeds might detect buried memories. He feared anything that could uncover the truth about the Horcrux and his unwitting role in Tom Riddle's past assistance. Her ploy was deliberate. Better to frighten him away from prying than to lie outright or refuse. The diversion cost her nothing. A few days later, the base soil was finished. A dark, warm brown earth shot through with tiny silver flecks that gleamed like starlight. It felt smooth and almost warm under her fingers, humming with contained power. She planted 3 anima tree seeds into that special soil, set the pot where the moon could reach it, and watered with the purest morning dew she could collect, sweetened with a touch of her own spiritual energy. Time, patient and slow, did the rest. Nourished by the breathing earth seed and the refined base, the 3 long dormant seeds finally broke their coats. Thin, translucent shoots unfurled, pale as new milk and impossibly delicate. The instant they emerged, Jiang Wu felt a barely perceptible, exquisite ripple of calm unfurl from the pot. The air around her softened, even the leaves outside the window seemed to rustle more gently. The anima tree had begun to live, and Jiang Wu knew, with a quiet certainty, that this was only the first sign. Those fragile saplings would, in time, take on a purpose she could not yet fully see. Their whispered presence carried an old power and a small, stubborn hope. Chapter 78. The Commotion at the Weasley Household and the Twins' After-Sales Service. Toward the end of August, the quiet at Hogwarts was shattered when Errol, the Weasleys' perpetually disheveled owl, hurtled into a window with feathers akimbo. He wasn't carrying a letter so much as a crumpled, hastily scratched note, jagged handwriting, as if written while trembling, signed by Ginny Weasley. "Jiang Wu, help! Kitchen! Mushrooms! They're jumping and screaming. Mum's about to faint. We can't handle them. Ginny." Someone, probably Fred or George, had tried to add product number 73B, jumping screaming mushroom, but the line was smudged beyond legibility by a great blot of ink. Jiang Wu read the note, was silent for 3 seconds, and then moved without hesitation. "Jumping screaming mushrooms. that had Weasley's Wizard Wheezes Experimental Disaster written all over it. She packed a small bag in a flash, several calming potions, a potent herbicide, and a pair of custom noise-dampening earplugs. Then she used the Flu Network to travel straight to the burrow. As she tumbled out of the burrow's perpetually messy fireplace, a wave of sound hit her. Women shrieking, men bellowing, and a painfully high rhythmic ah, boom cha, that sounded like a room full of mandrakes on a bad day. The kitchen was chaos. Dozens of fat-capped, brilliantly colored mushrooms were bouncing everywhere. Tables, chairs, the countertops, even the chandelier. They launched with astonishing spring, and every time they hit a surface, let out an ear-splitting scream, then paused in a maddening, perfectly timed rhythm like a delirious marching band. Mrs. Weasley stood pale as a sheet, her wand hand shaking as she tried and failed to freeze one. She turned a bowl of potatoes meant for lunch into a bowl of ice. Mr. R. Weasley muttered and attempted a levitation charm, but the mushrooms were too erratic. Ron and Ginny clamped their hands over their ears, frantically sweeping at the little beasts with brooms, their faces crumpled in pain. Their efforts only seemed to make the mushrooms jump higher and yell louder. The twins were nowhere to be seen. "Oh, Merlin's fattest underpants!" Mrs. Weasley almost dissolved into tears when she saw Jiang-Wu. "My dear, please think of something." Those dreadful things came from spores George and Fred brought back from who knows where. They said it was going to be some kind of party surprise prop. Jiang-Wu fitted the noise-dampening earplugs and the world dropped into manageable sound. She watched the mushrooms' hopping pattern and the cadence of their screams, then took a small spray bottle from her bag. Inside was a powerful sedative she diluted with Ninglu grass essence, silent vine sap, and a touch of water. Instead of trying to hit individual mushrooms as they flew, she waited for a single moment when a cluster of them all landed at once. Then she sprayed liberally across the floor where they gathered. Hiss! The liquid hit the ground and the stems, and a heavy, soporific scent unfurled. The mushrooms that had been poised to rocket back into the air slowed. Their jumps flattened. Their screams dwindled into weak, halting sounds, like a recording with a stuck tape. "Ah! Cha! Now! Quick!" Jiang-Wu snapped at Ron and Ginny. The two grabbed their chance and swept the dazed fungi into a large empty tin bucket. Mr. Weasley slammed on the lid and piled heavy things on top. Muffled thumps and plaintive half-screams, thump, thump, thudded from inside the bucket. The kitchen fell quiet at last, and the entire family exhaled as if they had been released from battle. "Merlin, thank you, my dear." Mrs. Weasley sagged into a chair, dabbing her forehead with a handkerchief. "I truly don't know what I would have done without you. Those two rascals. When they get back, I'll give them a proper lesson with their own products." George and Fred finally slunk in through the back door a few minutes later, wearing apologetic grins and as much curiosity as contrition. "Whoa, sorted?" Fred whistled as he eyed the still vibrating bucket. "We only nipped out for a bit to fetch the antidote." George offered a small bottle as explanation. "A bit? The mushrooms nearly tore the roof off." Mrs. Weasley fumed. The twins looked sheepish and doubled over their necks. Fred thrust the bottle toward Jiang-Wu. "Ahem, powerful silencing settling agent, supposed to quiet them and stop the bouncing, but looks like yours did a better job." He peered at the little spray bottle in Jiang-Wu's hand. "Hey, what's that? That stuff is brilliant. Fancy a collaboration?" Jiang-Wu ignored the sales pitch. She took the bottle they offered, examined it, and sniffed it. "The dosage is wrong," she said. "The mandrake extract concentration is too high. That'll overstimulate the nerve cords, more violent spasms, and a higher-pitched scream. You should add an equal amount of sleeping pod juice to neutralize it." The twins' eyes went wide as if they'd been let in on a secret. "Sleeping pod juice?" George slapped his forehead. "Of course. How didn't we think of that?" "Genius. Absolutely genius," Fred crowed. "Jiang-Wu, you should come work with us as a technical consultant." After the prospect of job offers and business banter, the panic finally ebbed. Mrs. Weasley insisted Jiang-Wu stay for lunch. The mood around the table was warm and relaxed. Mr. Weasley peppered her with questions about her potion making, fascinated by the principles involved. Ron and Ginny watched her with obvious admiration. As she prepared to leave, the twins slipped something into her hand, a gaudy, lifetime free VIP card for their joke shop and a small bag of their latest generation portable swamp bombs as a thank you. "Come by and tell us what we're doing wrong anytime," they winked. Jiangwu turned the card over in her hand and peered at the dangerous little bag with an exasperated shake of her head. Still, she had to admit that the whole ridiculous episode, the noise, the near disaster, the mismatched remedies, the stubborn family squabble, had thawed something in her. The Weasleys' chaos, for all its clamor, felt like noisy, vibrant sunshine on a hazy summer day. Chapter 79: Secret Letter and Preparations Before Dawn. The last days of August grew heavier, the heat pressing down as if everything were holding its breath for a final storm. Inside Hogwarts Castle, students and professors were sparse, and a pre-storm silence settled over the corridors. Jiangwu's life followed a strict rhythm, tending the anima tree saplings, practicing formations, and reading old texts. Yet she felt an invisible net tightening around everything. Just at dawn one morning, a barn owl she did not recognize, dull gray feathers and keen eyes, slid silently through a crack in her classroom window. It dropped a small note folded into an amulet shape with protective charms, then turned and vanished into the dim light. Jiangwu's heart tightened. This was the Order of the Phoenix's highest level of encrypted urgent message. She took the note, channeled a trace of spiritual energy, and watched it unfold. The handwriting was Dumbledore's, hurried, intelligence confirmed. Operation moved up. The cargo will be transferred on the eve of September 1st via 7 different routes to cause confusion. The real cargo will be escorted by Hagrid departing from Privet Drive. Risk is extremely high. The enemy may have detected us. We need additional, hard-to-detect protection. Can you set up temporary natural camouflage or interference in the designated coordinates? No direct combat intervention. Concealment is paramount. Reply method: place bluebell petals in the West Tower window. Jiang Wu's eyes scanned the magic coordinates. A small wooded area and wasteland near Privet Drive in Little Winging, Surrey. Her pulse quickened. Dumbledore was preparing to move Harry Potter and was expecting fierce attacks en route. He needed non-magical cover that would evade the Death Eater's usual detection. The task was dangerous, but it was a direct vote of confidence in her abilities. She could not refuse. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she went to the 3 anima tree saplings and considered them for a moment. From each, she carefully plucked the smallest, most tender leaf. Anima tree leaves carried strong, calming, and confusing auras, and these first leaves, grown with the breathing earth seed, were purer than usual. She held the 3 leaves in her palm, pressed her hands together, closed her eyes, and drew on the breathing earth seed and her own spiritual energy. Slowly, she imprinted the intents of concealment, confusion, and calming into the leaves. It was delicate work and draining on her mind. When she finished, her face was slightly pale, but the leaves shone a deeper green with a faint ripple-like shimmer across their surfaces. She wrapped the leaves in oil paper and wrote a brief reply. Materials ready. Deployment completed before sunset tomorrow. Effect: potent aura concealment. Emotional calming. For allies, slight visual distortion. Duration: approximately 6 hours. J. Following Dumbledore's instructions, she plucked a wild bluebell, placed a few petals with the letter in a secluded West Tower window, and waited. A plain brown bird soon swooped down, took the items, and was gone. By the time she finished, it was broad daylight, but Jiangwu did not rest. She had to leave immediately. She would travel by flue to Diagon Alley, then find a way into the Muggle world, reach the assigned location, and, without drawing notice, deploy the 3 anima leaves with the strongest concealment she could now produce. The placement required precise calculation and an intuitive use of the surroundings. It was a covert race against the Death Eaters. She did not know the full plan, how many people were involved, or how much the enemy already suspected. She only knew she had to succeed, for Harry, for Dumbledore's plan, and for Cedric, somewhere out there working toward the same end. Hogwarts lay quiet before dawn, but Jiangwu moved like an arrow released from a bow, slipping into the deepening darkness to lay down a calm, hidden barrier in advance of the coming storm. The true confrontation had already begun. Chapter 80: Back to School in the Shadows. Steam from the Hogwarts Express condensed into gray-white clouds in the chill of early autumn, but it couldn't clear the heavy gloom that settled over every returning student's heart. Dumbledore's death, the fall of the Ministry, Lord Voldemort's open rise to power. Those things made the new school year feel like a long, cold corridor with no light at the end. Harry, Ron, and Hermione weren't on the platform. They had chosen a more dangerous path, following the clues Dumbledore had left behind to accomplish an almost impossible task. The castle gates still stood, but the welcome was different. The cheerful portrait of the fat lady was gone, replaced by a grim, severe painting whose subject examined each entrant with narrow, suspicious eyes. Even more unnerving were the two black-robed wizards posted at the doorway, Amicus and Electo Caro, whose arrogant, cruel faces stood watch. Their stares moved across the students like cold, venomous snakes, hunting for any sign of defiance or weakness. Jiang Wu submitted to the inspection with an outward calm. Her luggage looked ordinary. The truly valuable things, rare spirit plant seeds and carefully refined potions, had long been hidden by special means. She could feel the castle itself exhale tension and sorrow through its ancient stones. Severus Snape had become headmaster. He sat at the high table in the great hall, expression as unreadable as ever, his gaze colder and more oppressive than before. His opening speech was short and merciless, stressing discipline, obedience, and the new order, and announcing that the Caro siblings would take up posts teaching what was officially called Defense Against the Dark Arts and Muggle Studies, courses now twisted into dark arts instruction and pure-blood propaganda. Hogwarts had changed. Hufflepuff Tower, with its low profile and solidarity, became a temporary refuge for frightened, oppressed students. Unexpectedly, the greenhouse Jiangwu turned into a small oasis under the dark regime. Snape gave tacit permission for her work to continue. Perhaps he thought the plants insignificant. Perhaps he had other reasons. The Caros, arrogant as they were, still showed a measure of caution toward him, and the greenhouse seemed harmless enough, so they left it alone for the time being. That allowed Jiang Wu, under constant pressure, not only to carry on her research, but also to quietly convert the greenhouse into a meeting place and supply depot for DA members like Neville Longbottom and Ginny Weasley. One afternoon, while Neville was clearing an awkward stack of old flower pots, he found something tucked away and forgotten, a tattered copy of Advanced Potion Making. "Hey, look what I found," Neville said, blowing dust from the cover. "This book is ancient. Advanced Potion Making. Is this the Half-Blood Prince's copy?" Jiang Wu glanced at the book and felt a small, unexpected stir. She recognized it. It had lit a spark for Harry the year before and had caused friction between him and Hermione. Neville flipped through the pages, and his face changed as he read the cramped, slanted notes scrawled in the margins. "Merlin's beard," he breathed. "These methods, they're weird, but they look useful. Look at this note for werewolves, a mixture of moon moss and holy spring water, and this one, stir the drought of living death, half a turn counter to the usual motion." Ginny leaned in too, frowning. "These notes, they feel dark, like Snape's style." She had little trust left in him. Jiang Wu took the book and scanned a few pages. The annotations were efficient, ruthless, and unconventional. Some techniques edged perilously close to, or were outright, dark magic. The book was a double-edged sword, packed with potent knowledge, but rife with danger and temptation. "Knowledge itself isn't good or evil," Jiang Wu said, closing the book with a composed voice. "It depends on how it's used. This book is dangerous, but it could also be useful." She thought of Snape's divided loyalties. The book seemed a small mirror of that complexity. Neville looked torn. "So what do we do? Hand it to Professor McGonagall or burn it?" "Keep it for now," Jiang Wu decided. "But be very careful. We can study what might help us, ways to counter the Caro's new textbooks, improvements to Dittany or restorative potions, but everything has to be handled with extreme caution." In a time when anything that might strengthen the resistance was worth the risk, that battered Half-Blood Prince textbook felt like a stone thrown into a dark current. No one knew how far the ripples would reach.